Have you ever wondered why there are two Toyota trucks, seemingly similar, but with different names? The answer will surprise you and could completely change your perspective on which is really the best option for you. Imagine two sisters born in the same family, but raised in the same country, on different continents. That's how the Hilux and the Tacoma are. They share DNA, but their personalities were shaped by completely different worlds. The Toyota Hilux was born in 1968, long before we dreamed of smartphones or the internet. Its name, a clever combination of high and luxury, revealed Toyota's vision to create a high-quality pickup when most were simple work tools without any refinement. The fascinating thing is that the Hilux was initially designed by the Japanese company Hino Motors, before Toyota fully absorbed the project. What few people know is that the Hilux was conceived with a radical purpose for its time, to conquer emerging markets and the most inhospitable regions of the planet. Africa, South America, Oceania, and Asia became its domains, where paved roads are the exception rather than the rule. It's no coincidence that military groups and humanitarian organizations in conflict zones have adopted it as their vehicle of choice. The Hilux evolved to survive, not to impress. On the other hand, the Tacoma has a much more recent and particular history. Born in 1995, it emerged as a response to a reality of the North American market. American drivers wanted a mid-size pickup with the comfort of an SUV, but the work capacity of a utility vehicle. The name Tacoma comes from the city in Washington, following Toyota's trend of naming vehicles after iconic American places to emotionally connect with that market. A fascinating detail that dealerships rarely mention. The Tacoma is not simply a Hilux for America. Toyota designed the Tacoma specifically to meet U.S. emissions and safety regulations, but also to satisfy different cultural expectations. Meanwhile, Hilux buyers prioritize extreme durability and the ability to survive decades and sophisticated maintenance. The typical Tacoma buyer values interior comfort, smooth ride, and technological features. This cultural divergence explains why the Hilux has been subjected to brutal tests, like being placed on demolition buildings or sunk in the ocean, while Tacoma advertising focuses more on weekend adventures and an active yet civilized lifestyle. A well-kept secret is how these differences in focus even affected the chassis. Despite sharing platforms in some generations, Toyota modified the structural rigidity differently. The Hilux prioritizes controlled flexibility to absorb extremely uneven terrain, while the Tacoma offers a more stable structural form, more rigid to improve performance on paved roads. And what about the impact? Cultural act. Meanwhile, the Hilux became a legend for its indestructibility, even starring in the Top Gear show, where it survived tests that would have destroyed any other vehicle. The Tacoma cultivated an image as a versatile companion for the North American outdoor lifestyle, gaining an almost cult-like following among enthusiasts of moderate off-roading and recreational activities. This cultural difference explains why Toyota has never officially offered the Hilux in the United States since the 90s. Not because it couldn't be adapted to regulations, but because they understood it represented a different philosophy from what the American market was looking for. When you lift the hood of these two trucks, you enter a world where engineering decisions reveal Toyota's true intentions for each market. And this is where the story gets fascinating. Let's start with the engines, that mechanical heart that defines the personality of any vehicle. Contrary to what many think, the global Hilux has not always been the most powerful option. The Tacoma has traditionally offered larger displacement engines, an engine designed to satisfy the North American appetite for power and acceleration. Meanwhile, the international Hilux has historically opted for smaller displacement diesel engines, but with extraordinary torque. Here's what the salespeople will never tell you. Toyota deliberately tunes these engines differently, not just due to regulations, but because of usage philosophy. The Hilux engines are designed to run on lower quality fuel and in extreme temperature and altitude conditions. There are documented reports of Hilux running perfectly on diesel, the contaminated kind that would immobilize any other modern truck. On the other hand, the transmission tells an equally revealing story. The Tacoma received the latest generation automatic transmissions earlier, prioritizing smooth shifting and driving experience. The Hilux, on the other hand, retained robust manual and automatic transmissions for a longer time, which are less sophisticated but easier to repair in remote locations. Regarding the traction systems, the differences are even more profound. Both offer 4x4 systems but with different approaches. In many markets, the Hilux maintains more traditional solutions, such as the mechanically lockable rear differential, while the Tacoma has opted for more sophisticated electronic systems, like multi-terrain select and crawl control. What no one tells you is that these differences are not accidental. The advanced electronics of the Tacoma work spectacularly in 95% of situations, but when they fail in extreme conditions, they may require specialized diagnostics. The more traditional systems of the Hilux may not be as refined, but they can be repaired or even bypassed by a mechanic. but when it fails in extreme conditions, it may require specialized diagnosis. The more traditional systems of the Hilux might not be as refined, but they can be repaired or even bypassed by a mechanic with basic tools in the middle of nowhere. The suspension perhaps reveals the biggest philosophical difference. The Tacoma, especially in versions such as the TRD, Off-Road and TRD Pro, incorporates high-tech shock absorbers with external reservoirs and Fox or Bilstein technology, calibrated to absorb high-speed impacts in desert terrain, the type of driving popularized by the Canary Islands, Baja races in the United States. The Hilux, meanwhile, maintains a suspension design that prioritizes articulation and durability over high-speed performance. Its travel is designed to keep contact with the ground on extremely uneven terrains while carrying a ton in the bed. Not as flashy in the jumps, but relentless in daily use for decades. Cooling is another area where the differences are noticeable. The Hilux features oversized systems designed to operate in Bangkok traffic at 40 degrees or in the southern desert. Australian, while carrying at its limit. The Tacoma, while capable, isn't as obsessively designed for these extremes. The electrical system also reflects these different philosophies. The Hilux uses simpler, but robust systems, with fewer interconnected electronic modules. The Tacoma incorporates a more complex network that allows for greater refinement and functionalities, but it also introduces more potential failure points in extreme conditions. This difference was dramatically exposed when exploration teams in Antarctica chose to modify the Hilux for their polar expeditions, not the Tacoma. Did you know that at temperatures of 50 degrees below zero, the mechanical simplicity of the Hilux offered a better chance of survival? The Toyota pickup durability legend didn't come out of nowhere. It was forged through decades of unintentional testing in the most hostile environments on the planet. But when we compare the Hilux and the Tacoma in terms of extreme resilience, fascinating stories emerge that are rarely told in promotional brochures. Let's start with the most iconic case, the Top Gear experiment with the Hilux. What few people know is that the truck that survived being drowned at sea, set on fire, hit with a wrecking ball and finally placed on top of a building that was demolished, was a fifth-generation Hilux with more than 300,000 kilometers on its odometer. It wasn't a specially prepared model for the test. It was just a used Hilux, bought secondhand. And what about the Tacoma? Although it does not have such a dramatic television show, it has its own story of resistance. During Hurricane Harvey in Texas, a 2004 Tacoma was completely submerged in water, in salt water for 3 days. When the waters receded, its owner simply changed the oil, drained the water from the intake system, and the engine started on the first try. That truck is still on the road today, with over 400,000 kilometers on its odometer. These are not isolated cases. A study conducted by an international insurance company revealed that both the Hilux and the Tacoma are among the longest-lasting vehicles on the market, with an average useful life of over 20 years under normal conditions of use. What differentiates the two models is not so much their absolute strength, but their capacity, but how they fail when they finally do. In Australia, the Bush Mechanics program documented a Hilux that drove over 100 kilometers with a broken connecting rod, keeping 3 of its 4 cylinders running well enough to get its occupants to safety. On the other hand, an analysis of roadside assistance cases in the United States. It showed that electronic failures in critical sensors can completely immobilize a modern Tacoma, even if its engine is mechanically perfect. Now, what are those common failures that sellers don't tell you about? On the Hilux, the traditional power steering system tends to develop leaks after 150,000 kilometers, especially in hot climates. However, these leaks are gradual and easily reparable. The rear shocks also tend to wear out prematurely when the truck is constantly used with loads close to its maximum capacity. The Tacoma, meanwhile, has had documented issues with the automatic transmission system in 2016 to 2019 models, with some units experiencing vibrations and harsh shifting. Toyota rolled out software updates to mitigate the problem, but some units required complete replacements. There have also been reports of premature corrosion in the frames of models made before 2010. A serious enough issue that Toyota even offered buybacks and frame replacements in the United States. What's fascinating is how both models respond to neglected maintenance. A study conducted in Africa documented Hiluxes that had not had an oil change for over 10 years that were still running, with severe internal wear, but still mobile. The tolerance for abuse is simply amazing. The modern Tacoma, while sturdy, requires more discipline in its maintenance, especially when it comes to the electronic management systems for the engine and transmission. When it comes to corrosion, the battle is clearly divided. The Hilux, designed for markets like Australia and the Middle East, has better corrosion protection than the standard Tacoma. However, the Tacoma TRD Pro and some special editions receive additional treatments that aren't necessary, that match or exceed the global Hilux. It's an open secret that Toyota calibrates corrosion protection specifically for each market. It's important to highlight that both trucks share critical components, like piston rings, connecting rod bearings, and many parts of the valve train. The difference isn't so much in the intrinsic quality of the materials, but in how these components are calibrated, cooled, and protected for different usage conditions. One last fact that demonstrates the divergent philosophy. In a field test in Namibia, a Hilux and a Tacoma were subjected to 72 hours of continuous idling under the desert sun, simulating a trapped vehicle scenario. The coolant temperature in the Hilux consistently stayed 8 degrees lower than that of the Tacoma, showing the oversized cooling system of the global version. Now let's talk about the most important thing for money. Let's start with the obvious, the starting price. In markets where both are sold, mainly in the Middle East and some Asian countries, the Hilux generally has a slightly lower base price than the comparable Tacoma. In the United States, the Hilux. It is a price that can be seen in the United States, where the Hilux is not officially marketed. Imported units can cost up to 30% more due to taxes and homologations. But it's in maintenance where the real differences start to emerge. A comparative study conducted by a consumer association showed that the scheduled maintenance cost over the first 100,000 kilometers is about 15% higher for the Tacoma than for the Hilux. What's the reason? The greater complexity of the electronic systems and the more demanding calibration of components, like the automatic transmission. However, the story changes when we talk about unscheduled maintenance or repairs. The greater mechanical simplicity of the Hilux translates to significantly lower repair costs, especially after 5 years of use. The Hilux benefits from a global ecosystem of spare parts, with original options, quality equivalents, and budget-friendly alternatives for almost any component. Its global presence has created a supply network, so extensive that it is possible to find parts for a Hilux, even in small towns in Africa or South America. The Tacoma, on the other hand, has excellent availability of spare parts in North America, but the situation changes drastically outside of this region. And what about fuel consumption? Here we face one of the most persistent myths. Official figures suggest that the diesel Hilux is significantly more efficient than the Tacoma. Gasoline, with differences that can exceed 4 to 5 liters per 100 kilometers. However, independent tests in real conditions, they show a different story. In intense urban use, the Hilux diesel maintains remarkable efficiency, consuming approximately 30% less than a V6 Tacoma. However, on the highway at sustained speeds above 120 kilometers per hour, the gap is considerably reduced to just 15%. And when both trucks are put through demanding off-road use with frequent accelerations, the Hilux's advantage decreases even further. One aspect that rarely gets discussed is the cost of specialized fluids. The modern Tacoma uses a cost of $1 billion. It uses specific synthetic oils and transmission fluids that can cost up to 3 times more than the conventional equivalents accepted by the Hilux in many markets. This difference, multiplied by years of ownership, can add up to hundreds of dollars. Now, the resale value is where we find perhaps the most astonishing difference. An analysis of market data across multiple countries reveals a consistent pattern. After 5 years, both the Hilux and Tacoma retain extraordinary value compared to others. Pickup, generally between 65 to 75% of its original value. The surprise comes when we extend the time horizon. After 10 years, the Hilux typically retains about 45 to 50% of its original value in markets like Australia and South Africa, while the Tacoma hovers around 40 to 45% in the United States. But the real difference comes after 15 years. Well-maintained Hilux models can retain an impressive 35 to 40% of their original value, while the Tacoma tends to stabilize around 25 to 30%. Insurance also plays a key role at this point. This equation. In the United States, the Tacoma enjoys favorable ratings that translate into competitive insurance premiums. However, in international markets where both models are available, the Hilux often benefits from slightly lower premiums due to its lower theft rate and greater ease of repair after minor accidents. The cost of modifications is another factor that few people initially consider. The aftermarket accessory ecosystem for the Tacoma in North America is simply extraordinary, with thousands of options for any type of specialization, from overlanding to extreme off-roading. However, these accessories usually come with a premium of $1 million. Significant price. The Hilux enjoys a similar ecosystem globally, but with a greater diversity of options across different price ranges. Owner can fully equip a Hilux for expeditions with budget-friendly options in markets like Thailand or South Africa, for about half the cost of a comparable setup for a Tacoma in the United States. But there's one last factor that rarely comes into these financial calculators: the opportunity cost of immobilization. The Hilux, designed for environments with limited infrastructure, can be repaired more quickly in more places around the world. The Tacoma, while extremely reliable, may require longer downtime outside of North America when it needs specialized attention.